Hi guys, Tugger here with a new video, and this video will be my definitive Arms Warrior PVP guide video for Dragonflight, and I will regroup all the information that I've put out until now about the builds that I actually discussed, about the stats I discussed, the strengths and weaknesses of every build, and of course I'm going to track back to those builds, so I will always have in the description but also in the comments all the videos affected by those builds. So if you want to check those builds out and you haven't seen those yet, you can rewatch those videos or just watch those videos, and then you will have the whole explanation about those builds. I will discuss stats, I will discuss builds, and when you should use those builds, in which occasion, 3v3, 2v2, RBGs, more about duels, about cast versus caster comps versus melee comps. All of this we will discuss in the builds section. We will talk about the PvP talents throughout. I didn't do that in my previous videos because I wanted to do this on this video. I will discuss about all the PvP talents and when you should use each PvP talent, because everything is actually usable except maybe one is probably not that useful, but the rest is really diverse. It's very good for RPGs, very good for duels, for 2v2, for 3v3, for every kind of content. We are also going to discuss about comms. I didn't discuss about it in my previous videos. I'm going to discuss it right now because it's my definitive guide. I will talk about comms. I will also talk about a bit of the rotation, but rotation is build per build different, so you should check out the build videos to have the whole rotation based on that build. And in general, I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks, some macros here and there, and we can start of course with this guide right now. In the description you will see the timestamps, but also like underneath the video you can see normally chapters. You can just jump from a chapter to another, or if you're cooking and you want to watch the chapter a bit later, you can always re-watch that chapter in a later time. Again, let's start the video. Let's talk about Arms Warriors really quickly. I'm going to give you an intro. What is a Arms Warrior? An Arms Warrior is a fantastic melee that has support potential, has a primary melee potential, so basically you can carry games by yourself. You have insane burst, you have insane crits, and your consistent damage is not bad. You can actually kill at any point as long as you have stacks, depending on the builds that you're playing. You have a huge mobility. You would think that as an Arms Warrior you have little to no mobility compared to a Fury Warrior, because a Fury Warrior has Blood Rage, for example. We do not. But remember, in 3v3 or in 2v2 you're playing with a healer, and often they can just dispel you or give you freedom if they are a Holy Paladin, or even a monk can also freedom you with Tiger's Lust. So there's a lot of great things that you can actually rely on as an Arms Warrior. You should not watch the Arms Warrior and put it in a vacuum, because that's not going to work. You need to see Arms Warrior as the entity of a great piece of your comp. If it's RBGs, if it's 2v2, if it's 3v3, or even solo shuffle, Arms Warrior is a great asset and you should not look beyond it. People are comparing Fury with Arms. That's a whole other video. I will probably compare those two in a separate video. But trust me, whenever I'm actually saying that Arms is worth to main in Dragonflight, you should main Arms if you like the playstyle and you think you're afraid of being meta or not. Trust me, it is meta. Play a bit of those games, a bit of those builds that I'm going to propose, and you will have a great moment in PvP. I'm actually a sucker for Arms. I love it. Normally I wouldn't really main it this season because I was like planning on maining other characters, but I played Arms so many times, so much more than other characters, that now I feel like whenever I'm not playing Arms, I'm losing time, right? Okay, let's start with these stats. I've tested full haste, I've tested full mastery, I've tested full crit, or a bit of a variance with crit and haste, and I decided to go for a bit of both. So we have crit and haste, and we kind of drop mastery. Mastery feels like it's nerfed somehow, some way. The deep wounds doesn't do more damage. The increasing damage that they take is not as noticeable as you would think. It is noticeable, but again, if you're not critting, you're losing probably 80% of the damage, while consistent damage, yes, mastery is going to be probably good. But if I'm critting for 100k or you're doing consistent damage of 40k, well, my crits will overtake you if I'm critting more than you, right? So I'm going for a crit build. I tested everything. It feels the best, especially with the builds I'm proposing. Critting just makes you kill people. So whenever you crit on an execute, on a more strike, on overpowers, on blade storm, on spear of bastion, you're going to see their HP getting chunked, and that's actually satisfying. And for me, it is enough reason to go for crit. Also go for haste a bit, because again, if I have to choose between haste or mastery, it will be haste. And a bit of haste is always nice because it feels just smoother to play. And I would recommend you guys also play like that way, like a 50-50 with crit and haste. You could go full on crit, but then it feels a bit sluggish. You could also go for full haste, but not critting just feels a bit sad. To be honest, critting is what makes it fun for me. And I feel like having 25% crit is benefit for me, so that's why I'm going for that. I play with the unused trinket, and sometimes, since I'm a human, I can play with double trinket and play with will to survive, but it's very, very greedy, guys. You want to be more mobile and not being stuck in stuns and such, and yes, you will do more damage, and you will have more haste too. But you will miss the primary stat of the strength, by the way, but also the 2-minute CD on trinket. And will to survive, it is good, but it's a 3-minute CD, and it's only for stuns, and there's a lot of things that you want to go away from. And that's why I like to have the medallion, but you can do whatever you want, right? You can even go from Battle Master if you really so desire, but I would not suggest that. Basically, we're going for stamina verse because I'm very cheap, but you could go for crit verse or crit haste on your gems. Depending, you can have 3 gems, of course. Again, I'm very cheap. You see my gold. I have only 2,000 gold, so I need to grind it, and I don't have the time for it, unfortunately. We have the speed enchant on the cloak. It's super interesting because we want to have 10% speed baseline, and your cloak enchant, your bracers, and your boot enchants are perfect for that because you get 10%. And then if you're going for fast footwork on the talent section, you can have 15% baseline, which is quite good because you want to be fast and want to be mobile, and it helps you to actually get to your targets. Again, we're going for verse enchants on the rings, and we're going for fierce armor kit on the legs, which basically gives stamina and strength. And yeah, that's about it. I'm very, very fond of that build. We do play with burning writ, which gives crits whenever you get a enchant proc, but you can also go for Sophic writ or Sophic devotion if you're rich. Or if you have the mats to actually make it. And it's better probably because main stats is always going to be better than just crit. But I wanted to test it out, and it procs like 1 time every minute. Does it feel noticeable? I don't think so. So I would go for Sophic Writ or Sophic Devotion if you have the money for it. Now let's talk about builds and when to use those builds. So I've discussed 4 builds on this channel. We have the Bleed build, we have the Mortal Strike Big Damage build, we have the Fatality build, and we have the Blade Storm Unhinged build. Of course, you could also say there's a whirlwind or whirlwind build, and there's also a Fatality with Blade Storm build. Like there's a lot of variation that you can actually switch out and switch in. But the idea still is the same, right? And I'm going to talk about those ideas on those builds. And I'm going to propose to you guys, if you haven't seen those videos, to go back to those videos and to watch the build videos, because there I will be more precise, more about the rotation, more about the strengths and weaknesses, more in depth about those builds. But in this video, I will give you why you should choose those builds, in which occasions, and you will see that it's going to be more interesting and more clairvoyant to actually know what you're going to do to actually perform in PvP, right? So we have the Max Mortal Strike Damage build right now, which is basically revolving around Blade Storm and Hurricane. Hurricane in PvP gives you 15% strength over the duration, and with that idea is whenever you're doing a Blade Storm like setup, where you're going to build that hurricane with Colossus Smash and Spear of Bastion and Avatar. At one point, whenever you have, like, let's say, Executioner's Precision stack on the enemy and you have 2 overpower stacks on yourself, you're going to do insane amounts of damage on your Moral Strike. I already critted for 200k. You can watch a few videos before about that. It does insane damage. Moral Strike also got buffed multiple times this season already, which makes that Moral Strike is going to hit a lot, and you're going to have an insane time with this build. This build is a really good one. It's probably my top 2 best builds, if I may be honest. There's a few flexible talents, but I do discuss about it on my build video. I don't want to make it a 2-hour video just because I wanted to keep it compact and watchable for people. But there's a few like flexible talents. You don't really need Stormwall if you're playing versus casters, right? You can go even Rend if you want to play without depth experience. I already discussed why I didn't go for Rend on those videos. You can go for intervene versus physical teams versus caster teams. You don't really need that. You can go for fast footwork. In RBGs, you can just opt out of intervene and go for second wind. There's multiple good things about that build. We do play with Wrecking Throw. Again, you play a lot versus warlocks. You play a lot versus people that can shield themselves. Wrecking Throw just puts that away, and you're going to have a great time to actually kill people. Because whenever you're bursting and they are reacting with a Dark Pact, a Wrecking Throw just deletes Dark Pact whenever you have Avatar up or Colossus Smash up on the enemy. And they might not notice it, but they are already dead once you have like built up all that damage and they don't have any wall on themselves. So why should you play this build? Well, you should play this build if you're facing, let's say, casters. Because in general, versus casters, having Blade Storm is very, very important. If you're playing RBGs, this build might also be very good because you have a Blade Storm again. It does quite some damage, and also the cleave potential with Sweeping Strikes with the max damage on Moral Strike can decimate people. Versus who you should play with this build? Well, I'm going to be honest, it's more a 3v3 build and not a 2v2 build because you do like Fatality, and I feel like Fatality is a great 2v2 talent. I'm going to discuss about it on the Fatality build. But with this build versus casters, Solo Shuffle is also very great because it's a very bursty game mode. Games are not going to last as long as you would think. So one good Blaze Storm, one good setup will make you hurt very much on your Moral Strike, and people just don't notice it, right? So it's a very good build to do that as well. Your Colossus Smash does also a lot of damage because you do have blunt instruments, and you will see that sometimes you're critting for 60k, 75k on Colossus Smash, which is basically just like a buff to yourself, right? To do more damage. It's not like made to do damage, but since you have blunt instruments, you're going to do a lot of damage on Colossus Smash, and you might just delete someone because of it, right? So those are the reasons why you should play this build. If you're playing versus heavy melee, I would say it's a bit harder because you will lack the double Blade Storm, for example, or you will lack the Fatality sometimes versus more tanky melees. But versus casters, this is my go-to spec. If I play versus casters, like double casters, like let's say a Lock Shaman or Lock Balance Druid or anything else like this, I feel that this build is really well made for it. And I do play with Blade Storm, I play with Sharpened Blade, and Demolition is my flexible talent, where I'm going to talk about it in the PvP talent section. But often I will take Demolition or Warbringer with this build. Alright, let's talk about the second build. Everything is in timestamps, guys, so you will not miss anything. The second build is basically the Unhinged build. That was my latest video about Arms Warrior, where I covered it in a guide and also made a BG video to showcase you the damage that it can produce. It is pretty much the same as the max damage build, but we opt out of Warlord's Torment, which gives you recklessness. We go for Blade Master's Torment because we want that double Blaze Storm, so you have double the value on Unhinged. And you have also Storm of Destruction, which gives you a 1 minute CD on Blaze Storm. And you have, of course, Anger Management, giving you Blaze Storms every 45, 40 seconds, I would say. Something like that. So it's insane the amounts of unhinged Bladestorms you're going to do. In general, you're going to do insane damage whenever you're doing a Spear of Bastion with a Bladestorm. You're going to probably kill someone if they are not noticing their HP, if they are not doing a wall, or if they are not like healed by their allies, or if the healer is CC'd, they might die into a Spear of Bastion Bladestorm. In general, you can just do Avatar, it will do the Bladestorm, and then you can continue to burst with your Avatar, and then you can do Bladestorm at the end to have full value on that Avatar as well with, again, the Blade Master's Torment. A lot of flexible talents again on the class tree. Intervene is flexible because versus casters you don't really need that, except if you need to run away from the casters, but often than not you don't really want to run away from casters. Again, Stormwall, you don't play that versus casters. Versus Demonology Warlock, I would play that because the pets are melee. Like Felguard, if a Felguard is on you, you're going to heal yourself. So that's something you should notice. Where I'm going to discuss about it in a next video about tips and tricks and such. Interesting, neat knowledges that you can have on arms. But this build is my top 2 build as well. So the max mortal strike damage and this unhinged build are both my fan favorites. And the reason why I would play this build over the max mortal strike damage build, it would be depending on the tankiness of the enemy. If I feel like it's a quite tanky enemy and one more strike will not kill someone, like the max mortal strike build will not kill someone, I feel like Unhinged can do that for me, because Unhinged is something that is going to pop every 40 seconds if I used all my CDs, or I can do a back-to-back Bladestorm, and people cannot like kite you whenever you're doing Bladestorm, right? Except if they are leaping or blinking or whatever, but that's your job to actually notice that they have mobility, right? But if they don't have mobility and you're storm bolting into a Bladestorm, people cannot fear you, people cannot stun you, people cannot disarm you, and Bladestorm hurts a lot. Often in this build, my Bladestorm damage is often top 2, because it just does that much damage. And Unhinged, actually, Mortal Strike, whenever your Bladestorm does 30k and your Mortal Strike does a 50k, and then another Bladestorm damage just right after it, it just does 100k for free, just with one Bladestorm swing. So you should understand that it is very bursty and you should not underestimate it. I've made a video about it, so if you want to have more information about that build, go to this video. Why would you play this build? Well, if you're playing versus casters, if you're playing versus melees that are regrouped like all the time, you can basically sweeping strikes, Bladestorm, and you have Unhinged hitting everything. So that's also very good in a very cleavy situation. So I would say double melee like a TSG or a Demon Hunter DK that gets cleaved 100%. Like the Max Mortal Strike build, you would play it, for example, if you're playing with versus a melee and caster, like let's say a warrior with an elemental shaman, like a Thundercleave, you would do the max mortal strike damage build, because they will not be always regrouped together, right? But with this, if you're playing versus a double melee, this build is insane. It does a lot of damage and it is actually satisfying to do. Versus who shouldn't you play this build? Well, I think Unhinged is one of the most flexible builds. If you want to have only one build and only one build, I would say Unhinged is probably the most versatile build. But if you're playing a lot of 2s, I would not go for the Unhinged build, because often than not, you don't really need the unCCable moments. It does help you versus rogues. So versus rogues, you do want a Bladestorm. But if you're playing versus, let's say, a 2v2 matchup where you're playing Survival Hunter, Resto Druid, I would say, like something that's very popular, I would not go for this build. I would probably go for the next build I'm going to propose right now. So the next build is the Fatality Build, and that was my first build that I discussed on this channel. It's my second build, excuse me. My first build was more strike max damage build. That was also a very insane build, to be honest. This build is a insane build. It is actually so good. You would think that it is actually not that good, but it is actually very good. The only problem that you have is you don't have Bladestorm, and not having Bladestorm makes you more targetable, I would say. It's very hard to actually CC someone that has Blaze Storm, because you can also CC into nothing. But if you don't have Blaze Storm, they can just CC you at all times. So they will not be afraid of doing a stun, and it will get immune because of Blaze Storm. So this build is my go-to 2v2 build. If I play 2v2, this build is what makes it very good. Fatality is a talent that is a bit nerfed in PvP, because I do discuss that in my video about the Fatality build. So if you want to check that out, please check that out. The Fatality build is a great dampening build. If you can play dampening games like in 2v2, or sometimes in 3v3, depending on the situations, Fatality can stack up to 5 times. I don't think it can stack more, because I never really tried it, but 5 times it can stack, and you can unload everything onto one execute underneath 30% health. And trust me, if you do an execute, and it doesn't even need to crit, it does like 30k. 30k without critting, the Fatality will just do 50k, so it will be a 80k, just normal hit. And that's often enough to kill someone at underneath 30% health. And now, with the build that I'm playing, with the stats that I'm playing, I do crit a lot. And you have a lot of talents that are actually going to make you crit more, like let's say the Sharpened Blades give you 5% crit on execute. Here, 2% increased crit a chance because of critical thinking. You have also Cruel Strikes giving you 2% increase crit again. You have also your Spear of Bastion that makes your damage crit for more. That your crit damage will be more in general. So it's a very good build for dampening games, because if you don't have time to actually kill someone in one go, you should prepare it for your one and only go whenever someone is beneath 30% health. And trust me, if you have like 5 stacks and you're beginning to do a Colossus Smash into Avatar, it is bound to happen that that guy is going to drop onto 30% health. And then one execute is going to be enough to actually win the game. And I really appreciate it. I did a lot of 2s versus friends, like guildmates. We did like 2v2 healer versus healer DPS versus healer DPS, because I wanted to test that out. And trust me, in 2v2, this build is the build. It is really the build. Of course, there's a place where you could play Unhinged, so you can actually be more mobile, you have more Blaze Storms, and let's say it's difficult to actually catch up. Like, I would say versus a Frost Mage, you don't really need Fatality build, because you are going to drop them, right? You're going to kill them if you're like near them. So having Blaze Storm helps that with that. But let's say versus a rogue, versus a survival hunter, versus an outlaw rogue, versus another warrior, versus something that is more tanky, which you know that it will be a bit more dampening. You will win in 2 minutes or 3 minutes instead of 1 minute goes, for example. Fatality is enough to actually make you win games by themselves. You just need time, you need to stack, and to have the opportunity to put them at 30% health. And then if you crit a execute plus the Fatality, people are going to get overkilled and they don't even understand what is going to happen. So this build is very, very good. Of course, you don't have Blade Storm, so you do opt out of Storm of Destruction and you go for Warbringer or Death Sentence. Death Sentence is very nice because, again, you're playing an execute build, so you want to be in their face at all times. So Death Sentence will help with that. You also have Warbringer, which is something that is quite nice, and Demolition is quite depending on the situations, I would say. So you could play Warbringer and Death Sentence together, or you can play a bit more defensively. Since it's a 2v2 build, you can also make it work in RBGs, by the way, because RBGs are also very they have longer fights too, like longer team fights, so you could also play this build too. Master and Commander is also something interesting to have. I would not go per se with that, because I do like my macro that lines up Bitter Immunity and Master and Rallying Cry together. But you can play Master and Commander, you can play duel versus like very cleavy targets that just wants to go onto healer. War Banner is quite nice too, but it's a long CD for me. Disarm, obviously, if you're playing versus a Frost DK, you should go for Disarm. But we will talk about it in the PvP section. In the PvP talent section, right? So we have one more build to discuss. It is my least favorite build, but I know that some people play that. I did cover it on my channel too. it's my least favorite build because I feel like Blizzard just doesn't want you to play that build. So it's bleed build. So basically you're playing with a lot of bleeds. You can one shot, one tap someone with Skull Splitter if you're like aligning every CD possible. But it gets nerfed. But you don't play with Bladestorm, and but you do like a lot of interesting talents just to make your bleed stronger. That is more or less the weakness of that build, because you need to spend a lot of points to the left side of the talent tree, which is not really the most interesting side. It is interesting for rend and for deep wounds, but the bleed damages are nerfed in PvP. So deep wounds is nerfed, rend is nerfed, thunderous roar is nerfed, everything is nerfed. So you basically are playing a nerf state of bleed, which is not ideal if you want to be optimal, I would say. It is a fun build though, you can play it for fun. I would say in BGs it can work. I would say in 3v3 it can work, because again, you have another DPS to set you up and you can really do a lot of damage whenever you can do that. But it's very CD reliant, very setup reliant. I would say this is the most setup Arms Warrior build that you can play. So if you're playing with a setup class, like let's say you play with a Feral Druid, which is not really set up at the moment. It's more like on your face at the moment. Feral Druids do insane damage, but if you're playing like with like more setup comp, which is not really that common as a warrior, you can play this build and do insane damage. You can kill someone with just a rend, deep wounds, into thunderous roar, into a skull splitter. You're going to kill someone if you have Closer Smash up and you have Avatar up, but you will have to pop every CD possible, and then you're like, well, what am I going to do now? I mean, he survived, and that's more or less the feel that you have with the bleed build. It does damage, trust me, it does damage, but you get annoyed by all the people that can stop you when you're doing that. And evokers can just dispel themselves. You can play versus dwarves, they can just stone form. You play versus dark iron dwarf, they can just also storm form, like blood. I don't even know how it's called anymore. Blood fury or something like that. Anyways, the ratio of dark iron dwarfs, where they can just pop it and all the bleeds are removed. You have a lot of like situations where you feel like that talent is not going to work, and you cannot know that in arenas, right? You don't know if you're playing versus a dwarf, you don't know if you're playing versus a dark iron dwarf. You should know that you're playing versus an evoker, so you should just opt out of bleeds. But this is more or less the bleed build that people play. I covered it on my previous video, so please check that video if you want to see more about the bleed build. It's fun to play. I like bleeds. The problem is it's nerfed in PvP. I wish they were buffing it, but for now they are not doing it because they are afraid of the Skull Splitter like one shots, which is a shame because it's basically what they are asking us to do with the Tide of Blood. You use a lot of actual talents to make your bleeds work. Like you play Bloodletting, you do play Battlelord, because else you would have no damage outside of it. You have Rand, you have Bloodborne for 2 points, so basically you have like here already spent 5 points just to be competitive, and a 6 point in Bloodletting. And yeah, you are in a kind of a situation where you don't have a lot of points to spend on other sides of that build, right? So this is more or less the blood build. I would play probably with Warmbringer, and still Demolition is still something very good to have. But you can play this Death Sentence as well, because it's also a Fatality build. It's just a Fatality build with a bit less damage. Alright, so let's talk about the PvP talents, because I talked about the 4 builds. Again, I'm going to repeat myself. If you want to have the full information on those builds, so the rotation, how I made the talent builds, why I take specific talents, please go to that video. You can skip over the intro if you want. You can skip over the stats because we do discuss right now. But watch the build, watch the rotation, and you will understand why or how you can set up that build. Because Arms Warrior is very methodical. If you don't know how to do a rotation, it becomes a bit harder to actually perform. Anyways, so PvP talents. I think Arms Warriors, are, or at least like warriors in general, have fantastic PvP talents. I'm going to discuss one by one and give you the situations where you might take it if you so desire. Master and Commander. 1 minute CD, shaving off of a real rallying cry, and grants 15% additional health. So it will be 30%, which is noticeable, but it's temporary health. So you're going to lose that health at one point, and you are probably going to die if you are low HP. It's great, but you can also just do a macro with Rallying Cry and Bitter Immunity, and you can have insane healing at that very moment, and you should not really need Master and Commander to survive. If you do need that, then you can play it. I think if you're playing double DPS, Master and Commander is something you can go for. Shadow of the Colossus is probably the only one talent that I'm not playing. It's not good. It just is not good. So yeah, skip over it. Storm of Destruction, I already discussed about it. If you're playing a Blaze Storm build, you should take it at any point. If you have a Blaze Storm available, it means that you have Storm of Destruction in your PvP talents. There is no question about it. You should never opt out of it. It gives also mortal wounds on every target you're hitting, so it's something interesting to think about. War Banner. War Banner is interesting if you're playing versus Rogue Mage, which is not really the most popular comp at this very moment. But if you're playing versus a lot of Rogue Mage, War Banner is probably the way to go, because it saves you probably a big CC chain. So I would go for War Banner instead of Demolition, for example, versus mages. Duel, very good versus Affliction Warlocks, Shadow Priests. You should understand that you will have to make tough decisions. I do not play a lot of Duel. If I feel like we're losing a lot versus Affliction Warlocks and Shadow Priests in general, I think Duel is one of the best PvP talents that you can go for, because it will reduce all damage towards your allies except to you, and it helps to manage actually your healer to actually heal the lower health targets that we could have versus Affliction Warlocks. Death Sentence, very good if you have Fatality build, very good if you have like the need of doing a Fatality. So if you have stacks of Fatality, you should go for Death Sentence in general. So it's a very good talent if you're going for a Fatality build, for example. Disarm is very good versus specific melees. I would disarm, for example, a Frost Decay, and Holy Decay is quite nice to disarm as well. You can disarm a Fury Warrior, a Arms Warrior. Retribution is not worth it to actually take a disarm, in my opinion. But it's very specific. You should know whenever you go for disarm in your PvP talents. If you feel like you don't need disarm, it can happen, then you do not take it. But if you feel like you're dying versus the same classes over and over and over again, you should go for disarm to actually be able to stop the enemy from doing damage. A Warbringer is a very good talent. It does damage, but whenever someone leaps or blinks or whatever, the damage proportion or whatever doesn't work. Sometimes it's bugged, or it's bugged, or it's intended, but for me it's bugged. And it does feel like sometimes you don't have a PvP talent whenever it doesn't work, but whenever it works, it does a lot of damage. Sometimes it crits for 30k whenever you are doing a burst rotation, for example. So it's a great PvP talent to have. You can switch out of Demolition if you're playing a Blaze Storm build, or you can play Warbringer instead of the Blaze Storm, Storm of Destruction PvP talent if you're not playing with a Blaze Storm. A Rebound is not that great, I'm going to be honest. It's very depending on the enemy. If the enemy is dumb and he sees a spell reflection and he does a big chaos bolt, or he does a big frost bolt, or he does a big pyroblast, whatever, yes, he's going to be hurt after it. But often not, what they do is just they throw a stupid thing on you and the spell reflection is going to go away, and there it is. You don't have a PvP talent, right? So I'm not playing Rebound. Sharpened Blade is very good because if you're doing a burst rotation, your Maul Strike will do more damage, but also reduces your enemy's healing by 50%. So it's quite good. It's the reason why Arms Warrior is actually very spiky, because people cannot heal through it, or at least they try to do it and then they cannot do it. I will do a tips and tricks videos where you will understand what I'm saying. For me, Sharpened Blades feels like a CC. So if you're doing that on your on a healer and you're trying to heal through it, it becomes very hard for them to actually survive, because it feels like a CC on how whenever they heal, there is nothing coming back on their HP, right? So Sharpened Blade, very good PvP talent. You probably insta-lock it at every moment, except maybe double DPS if you're playing versus let's say two DPSs that don't really self-heal, like let's say a Arms Warrior and a rogue, or like something like this, like a weird comp where you feel like there is no healing. Sharpened Blade doesn't really warrant a PvP talent spot, so you could go for Disarm at that very moment. Demolition is probably one of my best PvP talents. You don't know how good it is until you actually play it all the time. Like if you're playing in BGs or in arenas or whatever, and you're facing an Affliction Warlock or Demonology Warlock or Destruction Warlock or even a Mage or whatever, and you're doing a big wrecking throw and that shield is going to go away, it's actually insane. You know that on the actual details, like damage counter, it does 100k. Like, it just deletes a shield. It just means that you don't need to go through that shield to do damage. And it is just fantastic. I know Shadowing Throw is something that people like, but I feel like I don't have time to cast it. People have so many mini CCs, or they just pillar hump or whatever, and throwing a Shattering Throw for 1.5 seconds is just too hard to do. So that's why if you're playing with a priest, you don't need to should go for Shattering Throw. I would even say that sometimes you just don't take it. If even you don't have a priest or whatever, don't take Shattering Throw, because you will have difficulties to actually cast it and use it. People are not dumb. If they are doing a Divine Shield, they just run away. They're not going to stick into your face. Or if they're doing an Ice Block, problem is you're going to do Shattering Throw and then the rogue will just sheep shot you. So that's the problem. So for me, I like Wrecking Throw most of the time. And if I'm playing versus something else than someone that has a shield, I would just opt out of Demolition and even opt out of Wrecking Throw at that moment. So those are the PvP talents. Let's talk about comps. It's going to be a very long video, guys. So I hopefully you like those videos, because I try to be as informative as possible. Comps in 2v2. I like double DPS too. I'm a sucker for double DPS as a warrior. I know it's very hard to do because you don't have as much self-heal as other classes, and your self-heal is tied to be actual immediate range to do it. Like impending victory, if you're not melee, you're not doing any damage or any healing. Bitter immunities and 3-minute CD, which is only 20% increased health on you, like healing for you 20%. It's not that big. It's like if you have 400k health, it will be like in the range of 80k, which is not that big, to be honest. And it's also reduced by dampening. You can also pair it with Rallying Cry, but again, it's a 3-minute CD, so you have difficulties of surviving. That's why the best comps are with healers, and you cannot run away from that fact. It will always be healer, Arms Warrior. But you can also work with a DPS, and you can play with an Enhancement Shaman. Works also because Enhancement Shaman can heal you while they do damage. You can also play with a Shadow Priest. Shadow Priests have the particularity to have insane amounts of damages, and the people will not ignore that fact, and they will go on the Shadow Priest, and it means that you can really burst very high with your warrior. It's not the best comp, but you can make it work. You can play also double warrior. It's a bit gimmicky. You will feel like some comps you will just lose instantly, and some comps you're going to win. You can play with Retribution Paladin, but the Retribution Paladin, the problem is the healing is not that great at the moment, and the only healing that they can produce is actually with their own damaging spell. So just take our vengeance or whatever, heals them whenever they are striking, and that's actually something that they're going to spam. So Word of Glory is not really a thing anymore. Or at least they will not do that as often as before. And they have healing hands, so they can also heal or whatever, the flash heal, the fast flash heal. It's also interesting, but the healing is not as good as before, so I would not rely on healing. But you can go for a one-shot macro with the Retribution Paladin and sometimes win because of it. but I would suggest to play with a healer. Make it your life actually easier, and play with a healer and enjoy your time as an arms warrior. So the healers I would propose is Holy Paladin. Very good. You can play Holy Paladin, which is more about a melee healer, which is very good for you. You can play with a Resto Druid, but it's very annoying for the Resto Druid. I would not suggest to do that, because the Resto Druid cannot play aggressive. If you're going as an arms warrior, you don't have a lot of self-heal, self-peels. So they cannot play like cat form or whatever. They cannot do whatever they can do to play aggressive. I would suggest to play actually with a Holy Priest and with a Resto Shaman. Those two are probably the best healers for you. Disc Priest is quite nice too, but the problem is Disc Priest, they don't have a lot of throughput healing at the moment, somehow, some way. I love my Disc Priest, right? But I mean, other classes are just better. I would even say Resto Shaman is probably the best healer for you, because it has Lightning Lasso, it has Hex, it has actually a lot of damage with Stormkeepers, and you are actually very relaxed whenever you're playing with a Resto Shaman, because the Resto Shaman is often the target of the enemy team, and you have the possibility to really kill people with a Resto Shaman. So I would suggest, if you have the choice of the healer, go for Resto Shaman, help your Resto Shaman out. I think Resto Shaman is a underappreciated healer, which is in 2v2 going to be insanely strong. People are just sleeping on it. So anyways, Arms Warrior, Resto Shaman, or Arms Warrior with a Holy Priest, or Arms Warrior with a Holy Paladin. The Draktyr Evoker Preservation spec is also quite nice, but to be honest, I didn't really play a lot with them, so I don't know how good it is. So if someone played it before, please comment below how the pairing is between Arms Warrior and the Preservation Evoker, and I will try to edit it out or make a comment, talk about it in a future video, for example. So 3v3, I think Arms Warriors are probably the most flexible melee out there, with Fury Wars, of course, because Warriors is just a warrior. They are the most flexible melee. They can play with many casters, with probably all the melees except maybe rogues, and you are really well desired. I would say your intervene, your CC, your utility, and your way on how you're doing damage is very appreciated by the community. You don't really have a tough time by looking for a team, so it's going to be very easy for you to do that. You can play KFC, which is basically with a hunter. You can play Kitty Cleave, which is one of the best comps at the moment. Do not sleep on it. Feral Druids are insane, and Arms Warrior just pairs very well with a Feral Druid. You can play Thunder, which is with an Elemental Shaman. You can play Turbo, which is with an Enhancement Shaman. You can play also with a Boomy, but I would not do that, because Boomies play now a Rot build. So basically they play with Affliction Warlock, and they kind of throw all the dots on everyone and try to kill that way. I would suggest to play with a Warlock if you have the possibility to play with a Demonology Warlock. That is probably the best comp for you. And yeah, in general, you will have a lot of ways to do great. I would say mages are also very good. That's a very sleeper comp. It's going to be very good. It's going to be very bursty, and the mages have the peel to actually save you from little problems that you might have in an arena match, right? Melees wise, TSG, Red War, Enhancement Shaman again. You can play nearly with everyone, and that's the beauty about Arms Warrior. But if I have to suggest something, it is to switch your builds, because I know I said in the beginning of the video with the builds that I said what are the most ideal ways to play those builds, or versus who you're going to play those builds. But if you're playing with a TSG comp, I would say Max Mortal Strike Damage or Unhinged is probably the best 3v3 builds you can play for in general, because you can just Spear of Bastion, they are all grouped up, you're doing one big Unhinged Blaze Storm with Sweeping Strikes, and you're going to decimate everyone. If you're playing with a Retribution Paladin, you can also play more of a Blaze Storm build, and you can have huge success with it. If you're playing more of a dampening build, like a dampening game, like let's say with a Frost Mage or with an Arcane Mage, you can basically play the Fatality build. I know I said that it's more of a 2v2 build, But you can also make it in 3v3 because it's a dampening build. And if you're doing a dampening game with Fatality, you're going to kill someone under 30% health. So you need to also try to resonate between those builds. And that's why I ask you guys to watch those videos so you can understand why those builds exist and how it works and why those talents, so you can actually apply it to your own gameplay. And that's very important for you to actually improve your gameplay, improve your likeliness to actually have success with your arms warrior, but also have a lot more fun. And that's the most important thing. You will have a lot more fun playing arms warrior that way. There is no static build where you only play one build and that's it. That doesn't exist with arms warriors. You need to be flexible, and sometimes maybe you should play bleeds. It depends about the comp, it depends on who you're playing versus, it depends on the situations. In RPGs, you can pretty much play all the builds, but Bladestorm is still going to be very interesting because if they are grouped up, you're going to wreck people. And if they are not grouped up, and that's why it is also map dependent. And whenever I'm doing a RPG guide for arms warriors, I'm going to talk map per map and which builds I'm going for personally. But I would say something like this should be personal to you. You need to understand, like, look, I'm having huge success Fatality in 2v2. I'm not going to opt out of Fatality because Fatality is doing great for me. Or in 2v3, you'll play the max mortal strike damage and you are doing 200k mortal strikes and you do not want to do anything else. Then you play max mortal strike damage build and you're golden, right? But if you want to be flexible, that's the way how you should do it. So 3v3 comes flexible, switch your loadout, switch your builds depending on those situations, and you will be golden. Now let's talk about solo shuffle a bit, but I will make a separate video about that because I feel like I will need a lot more footage to show you guys what is my reasoning behind a few plays. You are not the best solo shuffle spec. I think everyone knows that. Warriors are just a bit too onto your face, and sometimes the healer just doesn't follow because they don't have communication. So if you're going in and you're not noticing that your healer is stunned 30 yards, 40 yards from you, it becomes very hard to actually like perform. So you should always have an idea on how you're going to play. Are you going to play next to your healer? Are you going to go balls deep? Or are you going to play a bit more conservative, like feel like, okay, I will leap away whenever there's a problem, so I will never go leap in, I will always leap out. So you can also play that way. You can play more of a like one-shot build, you can play more of a dampening build, but in social it's not really the case. Often the games are very, very quick, so you will not have a lot of fatality stacks, but you have a lot of ways to play solo shuffle. But that's your prerogative to actually choose how you want to play the arms warrior in solo shuffle. I will make videos to actually help you guys with that. So if you want to subscribe to the channel to know those videos and to watch those videos, please do, and you will see those videos online very soon. So let's talk really quickly on a few things that you should know as a arms warrior. Your mortal strike damage is now unnerved, so it means that it is worth it to throw sometimes a mortal strike without a overpower spam. So you can also overpower spam and then sharpen blade, do an execution, so you have a stack, and then do a mortal strike. So 47k on a PvP dummy without crits is quite good. But in general, it is build dependent, and that's why I'm asking you guys if you want to check the full rotation guide about the builds that I'm proposing. You have that on the previous videos. They have timestamps, so you can basically jump towards the rotation section and watch it for yourself. It's very hard to actually talk about a full rotation build because every build is different. If you want to have the full mortal strike damage build, yes, having more stacks just helps to do more damage. If you want to do like a bleed build, you should know how to do the rotation of the bleed build. If you want to play unhinged, you should know what you're looking for to do max damage on your unhinged playstorm. And that's very personal, and you should try to look for those guys and for those builds to actually understand the full rotation, the full explanation behind those builds. Anyways. I wanted to also discuss about macros real quick because I will explain to you how it can work for you. Of course, I'm not playing with multiple macros because a lot of macros are like one-shot macros, which is not really applicable on all the builds. For example, I have the avatar burst build, macro, which is giving me a badge plus avatar effect. You could also just add this, cast Colossus Smash, and it will do Colossus Smash with avatar. The problem is, if you're playing the Unhinged build, it will pop Blaze-Storm. So your Colossus Smash, or your, I think your Colossus Smash is not going to pop. It will do Avatar, Blaze-Storm, and your Colossus Smash will still be on CD. So it's not going to be very valuable. So you would not use this macro to actually do the one-shot macro, right? You have also multiple cancel aura Blaze-Storms. And I'm going to say that if you're playing the max Moral Strike build, which is this one, you cannot escape or you cannot cancel aura the Blaze-Storm, because it doesn't work. So like right now, I have cancel auras on all my abilities. I'm going to do Blaze-Storm. I'm pressing execute, pressing pummel. It doesn't work. It doesn't cancel. Because whenever you have Hurricane, it is not cancelable. So you should also notice that whenever you're doing Blaze-Storm with this build, you're going to stay in Blaze-Storm. Which is not bad, because it does give you a buff. But you should also notice that if you're doing a Blaze-Storm, you're committed to it. Or you can maybe click like out of it. I don't know, never tried it, but clicking out of it is not the most optimal way to actually cancel something, right? But if you're playing Unhinged, you can cancel it. If you're playing any other build that is with Blaze-Storm, with Unhinged, or just Blaze-Storm to court, you can cancel it with cancel auras. Let's talk about intervene macros. It's very interesting to have. Party 1, Party 2, so target is Party 2 or target is Party 1. You can also write the name here, so you can also target is, let's say, Togray. You can write it and you will always intervene Togray, which is super interesting because sometimes there is a bug with Party 1 and Party 2, it doesn't work, or it does switch out, and the problem is if you want to do intervene at the clutch moments and it does bug or it doesn't work, it's very annoying. So I prefer to put the names here, but at least I have the macros to already be available to me. I have also the Rallying Cry macro. With Last Stand, if you're playing Protection Warrior, you can also put that there. And you have Bitter Immunity, Rallying Cry together, and it will do a double heal on you, which is super good because Rallying Cry is increasing your temporary and maximum health, and your Bitter Immunity will heal on the maximum health proportion. So if you have like 500k, it will heal 20% of 500k instead of 400k. So it's something very interesting to play around. There's not many macros, to be honest. You can go very deep, but those are the macros I'm using to cancel auras for different builds. But often than not, just intervene the Avatar Burst build and the Rallying Cry macro. So you can also macro everything onto one, but you should know that whenever you're playing the Blade Master's Torment, whenever you're doing Avatar, it will do Blaze-Storm, so you will not have Colossus Smash tied to it. Anyways, so this is pretty much the video. I'm going to talk about tips and tricks on a next video where I will talk specifically tips and tricks in solo shuffle, in 3v3 or in 2v2, and you will have more, I would say, information on that video. Rotation wise, again, I will suggest to go to the next videos. So to the next video, to the previous videos on the builds, so you can actually check those rotations on the specific builds, because then it will be a 2-hour video. It's already a 50 minutes video, so it's very, very long. Also for me, because my voice is cracking. But I try to give as much information as possible, but still readable and watchable for people. So I would suggest you guys to go on the previous videos. If you didn't check that out previously, you can check those out. You can also subscribe to the channel. You will have still more Arms Warrior guys coming in, more tips and tricks, more gameplay videos, commentary videos about Arms Warriors, and of course, I have multiple classes, so I do also guides about Destruction Warlock. I also do guides about other classes that I'm leveling and actually performing on it, but I'm still trying to look at the best builds for those classes. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. I know it is a very long video, but I wanted to make a definitive guide for everyone, so you can actually check this guide to actually know which build you should play in which occasion. I think in solo shuffle it is very up and personal. You can play more Bladestormy. For me, I'm playing Unhinged and Mortal Strike build 100% in solo shuffles because I want that Bladestorm to actually get out of sticky situations, and sometimes you don't want to play with Bladestorm. Like say in 2v2 you don't really need that, so you can opt out. But in solo shuffle I feel like the extra mobility, the extra anti-CC that it brings is very interesting to have. Anyways, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet, and be sure to stay safe. We will catch each other very soon in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, cause every time I wake up I feel like it's Monday. Something's going wrong with all the chemicals up in my brain. All of a sudden I don't look at anything the same way. Got a build up of my thoughts sitting in an ashtray. I'm sorry that I'm so inconvenient, okay. Just let me be me and I'll stay out of your way.